officers. This is our Audit, Governance and Accounts meeting for Monday the 18th November. I will start by reminding us all of our fire evacuation procedures. There are no expected fire evacuation drills this afternoon, so in the event the alarm does sound, we will need to make an orderly way outside and meet in the entrance to Walmora Park. I was just looking to see if it was raining or not, but it's not, so at the moment we're okay. Remind you all the meeting is being webcast. I believe I have one apology from Councillor Cubitt. Do I have any other apologies? No, looks like a full house. Do I have any resignations, replacements? Not that I'm aware. Declarations of conflict of interest. Councillor Leek, then Councillor Harvey, then Councillor Gardner.
There are references in one of the papers to KPMG, and I declare that my daughter-in-law works for KPMG in Frankfurt. There's a reference to Granger, and I declare that at all times, from 2000 to the current time, my wife and I are shareholders in Granger, but we do not declare it on our declaration of interest, as the holding is not large enough for that purpose. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I had, or may still have, a personal interest in two sites that have gone through the planning system the past period. We're discussing the Section 106 paper today, so I should declare it here at this meeting like I do at P&I. It is, and it's on my register of interests, and refer anybody openly and transparently to look at that if they would like to.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
It's a very remote interest, but I am acquainted with one of the original directors of 3M.
I was just going to say, any more for any more now. But, I thank you for your flurry of interest and declaration of interest. Obviously remind you it's a matter for your own selves, and if at any point during the meeting you have anything further that comes to mind, then by all means raise it then. We have no urgent items to discuss today. We do then have to look at the minutes. I think you should have copies of the minutes on the tables in front of you. They came out online. Just want to wait a minute while you get those.
Chairman, could I just say, it really is unacceptable, really, to... I mean, I did print the minutes off, but I've forgotten to bring them with me. But why is it taking so long to produce minutes? I would have thought they're the sort of thing that were produced either that day or the day after and could then be sent out. But it doesn't happen just with this committee. It's happening with lots of committees where we are asked to print them off and bring them with us. And I just think that's something we should try to avoid.
I would agree it's something we try to avoid. I'm not sure how it takes so time for them to come out from other committees. Certainly on this particular instance, it may in fact have been my tardiness in approving the draft that led to them being late. So thank you for pointing that one out. But I will sort of take the point for minutes tend to come out a little bit later than they need to, but we'll take that back and reflect on it. For the minutes substantive, are there any comments, clarifications, queries, or can we approve them? I did have one action item that came out of the last ones where we did talk about circulating the latest project management handbook, because a number of the CWP actions relate to project management processes being changed or being amended, and it was discussed in the committee, that we would be sent a copy or referred to a copy of the latest project management procedures or guides. That's at 3813 Risk Management Strategy, and I've not seen that as yet. Councillor Watts.
Madam Chairman, I think we were informed at the performance panel that that's being drafted, and I asked if we could see an early draft.
If you can help us, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, members, there is an existing project management handbook, but as you'll see from paper B, which is the update on the Ernst & Young actions, that handbook is under review, due for completion in December. So I'm sure we could circulate an early draft. I think that would be more preferable than circulating the existing handbook. I can certainly do that, members, if that's useful. Apologies that I didn't pick that up.
Yeah, I say to say distributed when available. So I think I was just querying. I wasn't aware that it wasn't already available. So if it isn't, then members, apart from it going to performance panel as a committee, do you want to see the copy in draft, or are you happy it goes to the performance panel? Draft? Yep. Yes, please then. Thank you. Yes. Aside from that, can I agree the minutes? Agreed. Thank you very much. That moves us on to member and public participation. I am notified of none and I can't see anyone. Referrals from committees or council, I have none. And issues referred by cabinet, I have none. That takes me to item 11, use of regulatory, I always get that wrong, Use of Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000. We are asked to note that since the last meeting of the Audit, Governance and Accounts Committee, there have been no requests or authorisations granted for either directed surveillance or covert human intelligence sources. Do we note that? Thank you. Okay. That takes me on to item 12, and just before we get into item 12, which I'll ask Mrs. Taylor to introduce to us, I am aware that a number of the actions coming out of this update are being discussed and actioned by the Constitutional Working Party, and one of the possible consequences from that is that if things change within the committees, the committee structure, yes, I've seen you, we may, as a committee, be asked to review and amend our own terms of reference. It's kind of a bit chicken and egg, because we can't quite really review our terms of reference until we know what the potential impact on other committees and the Constitution is going to be. However, I'm minded to sort of send out some thoughts and suggestions in the next couple of weeks by email, and maybe we can start the initial thinking amongst ourselves, and then at a future point when some of the recommendations of the Working Party are more settled, we can then actually have a formal look at our terms of reference and decide how we take that forward. Is that a potential route that you'd like to think about, members? As a starting point, yes. Yeah. Councillor Gardner, you had something?
Apologies, Chairman, it's on a previous item when you referred to items referred to us by council. I have got an email here, indemnities for members and officers, which was at the last council meeting referred to ARGA. When are we going to see that?
At our next meeting. I think we had the previous meeting was an extra meeting, so this would arguably be the first full meeting, and I was asked a view and I decided we would take it at the next meeting, simply because we wanted to get through our treasury management pieces and our current agenda, so we will be taking it at the next meeting. Mrs. Taylor, could you paper B for me?
Thank you. Members, it's the update paper for the Independence Governance Report. On page 5 of 93 are the 3 outstanding actions in respect of the IGR. I'm conscious that work is a little slow on the officer and member protocols item. That's the second box there. The head of HR advises me that that work will be progressed by December. I was going to move to table page 6, but I can see Councillor Keating is indicating.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask about that particular item, and rather than wait for for it to go on, could you tell me who comprise the specially convened working group with senior leadership team, and I know the head of HR, by the way. who confirms the rest of the text?
Thank you, Councillor Chairman. That's actually the original comment. That group hasn't happened. There was a discussion some months ago now at CWP. I look at colleagues who might have been at CWP. That was an option to take forward around a conversation with senior leaders and SLT. But the discussion at CWP at that time was to have two pieces of work going forward. One which sought officer view on member-officer relationships, and another one that sought member view on member-officer relationships. And there was a discussion about how should that happen. Query, should that be a workshop? Should that be a one-to-one conversation? And there was some thought that a telephone conversation might be helpful. So that's what the head of HR is progressing. That bit hasn't happened. I think that would be for CWP to look at what we've got from members and officers as a whole and then decide where to take that forward. So other than take out something that has always existed in the table, it's a piece of old information.
If I may, Chair, which is still outstanding and has not been progressed so far.
No, Councillor Keating, you're correct, because at CWP they said that they progressed this way. So that bit hasn't happened because, as I understood it, CWP didn't want that to happen before the views of members and officers as a whole had been gained. But I'm instructed by CWP. We can change that brief, of course.
If I may, Chair, one final comment. I'll talk to you.
Yes. Sorry, I was distracted by another matter. Sorry, Councillor Keating.
Could I ask when you produce the next version of this, that it'll that be updated? Thank you.
Well, no, my apologies. There were two things. That, one, the scrolling bar and the screen for the webcam were not of evidence. So we were just checking that the webcam was working before we carried on. But it is, I'm assured. I can see it on the laptop. Yep. Sorry, Mrs. Taylor. Please continue.
Not a problem. Of course. I suppose I just made a decision not to take out something you'd seen before. But that's fine. Of course I will. My mistake. Right. So moving on to page 6 of 93. These are actions which came out of the discussion around the procurement of the IGR report, and I have an update since this table was printed, Chairman, around the awareness sessions for officers and members in respect of the new procurement strategy. I'll give a copy to Shelley for the minutes. And the update from the head of commissioning is this, that the new procurement strategy was adopted in October, and in line with current thinking and best practice, it is now a procurement and contract management strategy. However, just to keep us on our toes, there is a new EU procurement directive due in January 2014, and so we'll plan officer and member awareness sessions in January, so we are as up to date as we can be. So I have a timetable now for that one, which I didn't have when this just went to print. And then also on that sheet, as you can see there, members, it's the issues around project management that you can all see are outstanding on page 7 of 93 now to be December 2013. But I will, of course, circulate a draft document as you've requested. And then on pages 8 and 9, I would hope you would agree that we have some items that are completed. Thank you, Chairman.
I was just going to say, are there any questions on that? Councillor Harvey, you indicated.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions. On the page 5 of 93, in relation to review of scrutiny function, I'm just conscious of the overlap. I think that's how best to describe it, a delicate conversation that's taking place in CWP at the moment between the various members of that group, set alongside what the Chair rightly says was thinking, alongside Councillor Sherritt, thinking through, your thoughts on Argo going forward. That's an overlap. Both need to know the score there. If you've got thoughts, I think we need to make sure that the left hand is talking to the right hand, because what I'd hate to think is a conversation takes place in the Constitutional Working Party that isn't related to your thoughts, really, where you think the committee could go in the future. So a bit of cross-fertilisation there will go amiss on that one. And I think in that respect, there are some fairly huge elephants in the room left for the CWP to work through to even come close to fulfilling what I would describe as a review of the scrutiny function. It remains the elephant in the room as far as that's concerned. Just to go over to 8 of 93, document management. It's something I've raised before, but I'll carry on raising it. There was the issue of, rather than simply looking forward and saying, yeah, this is what we're going to do in the future, it was the understanding as well how we managed to lose those documents that are still lost in the archive. No one has said to me or presented to me a report of any kind that accounts for how the archive was allowed to get into the condition it did and give a reasoned answer to the question of scrutiny of that fact, to be honest. And I'm not looking for anything other than just a simple understanding of what happened, because unless you do, you can't necessarily simply say looking forward is enough. I'd just like to know how we managed to lose those documents, if that can be answered.
I think that's one I'll take away, because I'm just thinking the action arising was to learn lessons and look forward. I'm not sure that, or to what extent we can come up with an answer of how something happened in the sense that we know the condition the archive is in. But so how would we understand? How would we get to a position? I'm trying to think of how we get to a position where we'd understand what we had and what we didn't have without doing a full and comprehensive audit, and that's not something I think we can do in terms of an archive.
Well, Chair, don't get me wrong, that's been done. EY did that. All of that's done. I'm not asking to revisit anything. All I'd like to know, because I mean, some of these documents, as far as I know, they've never been found. We don't know if they exist at all or not. I don't think they do from words. It was just tying up that loose end. That's all I'm asking after. I don't want to reopen that at all, because Ernst & Young have done the job they did for us. We don't need to go back there. It was just one of the questions that I asked at the time that still hasn't been answered. That was all. And it doesn't have to be answered in committee. It can be answered offline if Laura would like to take it away and come back with an answer for me. It was just understanding an answer to that question. Why did we lose those documents in that sense? It was the why bit that was the most important part of the question I had left over. Because Ernst & Young have already identified what we lost.
Yeah, I'm still thinking on that one. Councillor Parker, take you in the meantime.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I really just want to add my support to the request that's been made by Councillor Harvey. I think there's no harm. Well, in fact, I think it's actually very important that we have an understanding. Therefore, that must mean somebody is interviewed by somebody to account for how they felt, whoever was responsible for the management of these documents, how they felt it went wrong, and we'd like to know what measures are put in place. I know that's the looking forward. Fundamentally, you can't sort of plan for going forward if you don't establish what went wrong in the first place. There's a due diligence here.
Okay, I think I'm taking the point. Councillor Gardner?
I don't think I can add a great deal to what Councillor Parker has just said. But yes, I think it is important that we go back and we look at what went wrong, if we can find out. Because if we don't know what went wrong, how do we stop it happening again?
Councillor Mitchell?
I'm struggling a little with understanding what's being asked. It seems to me that if we had missing documents, and I mean, remember the issue of the missing documents. If we had missing documents, I assume, difficult to think of any other explanation, I assume that there wasn't a complete and robust mechanism for A, recording the existence of any formal document of the council, and B, knowing where it is. And therefore what you do is you put in place a formal, robust mechanism for addressing that issue. I'm struggling to work out what is anybody going to say to anybody about why they think some documents went missing and what value that is to anybody, because all they can do is, well, my opinion is, will somebody know why the documents went missing? Is that what we're... And who would it be, and how would you find them? I'm just wondering how you answer the question.
Councillor Parker?
I think it comes down to a very fundamental point of accountability. there's a function that was important. The very fact that those documents went missing had a considerable impact possibly to affairs and matters that were needing to be established with regard to this council's business, and there must have been somebody whose job, whose role was to have either looked after the documents, put in place the sort of thing that Councillor Mitchell was talking about. And I think, you know, we can't just, as it were, blank that over.
Okay, I'm going to let Councillor Keating speak and then I'll come back to us.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I don't know what the archives are, where they are, and how they're managed. Right? And most councillors would not know that. Secondly, it is not a new principle. There is a law that says councils who raise money by law and spend money in accordance with law must record and maintain records of substantive nature, and this is not new. This goes back into generations ago, before us. And if we have been failing in doing that, we need to know, have we been failing, how we've been failing, and who was responsible whilst that failure took place. I mean, this is not rocket science. Since about 1900, the need to legally maintain proper records, if you raise money by law and spend it in accordance with that law, maintaining proper records is not new. Now, I mean, the questions that would intrigue me is, well, how long have we been failing? Because we only asked about one issue. There was only one issue we asked about. Had we asked about another 24 issues, we might have got a totally different picture. But the issue that we were talking about, and that raised the issues, was money down. A significant issue, of course, very valuable in terms of law, because we actually were taken to court and lost, the High Court. So, is this the only area where we were totally negligent in having proper records? I don't know. But it certainly raises the question in my head. Thank you.
Okay, so I think where we are with, I can understand where the question comes from. I'm kind of slightly in the same camp as Councillor Mitchell, however, in terms of we all recognise that the council has a duty to properly keep certain records for certain periods of time in a certain format. Whilst we maintain a record that is primarily paper-based, then the ability to manage that accurately is interrupted by different people who come and go, different systems who come and go, things that happen to paper records, be that, over time, different requirements to purge records because not all documentation is kept for the same period of time. So I can understand that we have a concern, which has been expressed a number of times through this committee, about documentation that was kept, how it was kept, and by whom, and who should have been responsible. I think having done a fair bit of review and reflection on that through the process of review, where we're at is, so actually what do we do to make sure that doesn't happen in future? And the purpose of the item on the report paper B was to recognise that we have made some recommendation towards an electronic system of management that will enable it to be much easier to manage and identify transparently where things are or where they aren't going forward. So I suppose it comes back to the question we want answered, and I'm not sure that we don't already know the answer. We know that we've not kept records as efficiently as we could have in the past, and that has led to some, if you wish, failings. Having known that and recognised that through one particular incident, we're now doing something about it. So I understand, what is the question other than that we're seeking to answer, which is, we know we haven't done brilliantly in the past. In a particular situation, it was an issue, but now we're trying to sort it out and fix it. how else do we answer that question? I'm struggling with the, yeah.
I mean, I think it's, I mean, for me, in terms of what we've said, and I agree with Councillor Parker, I agree with Councillor Keating on this one, and Councillor, all of it's been said around the table, really, because in a sense I don't think we're disagreeing, even Councillor Mitchell's questions and your own questions. The point being that the job was done, the report was published, the areas were identified, and we're working through them. You know, some of them have been completed, some of them are yet to be completed, and there's a lot of work in train. That's great. Just on this one particular bit, the very simple question you raised, was it a purge? What was it? The why bit to inform what is actually quite a good piece of work going forward, hopefully, of an IT documentation and so on, so that we don't have the same mistake happen again. But for me, there is still that issue of all those paper records, and I don't want to make a meal out of this, I really don't. But there's all those paper records that go back, I think, to the early 90s when we started to keep the archive. But again, I'm not sure, and I'd like to know, simply because, you know, some of the decisions that have come up recently that have been legal issues for us as an authority do relate to the evidence base that we could produce ourselves to substantiate one way or the other comments and so on. But when we went and looked, it just wasn't there. Now, why was that? It's a very simple question, if you like, that relates to Councillor Parker's point about accountability. You know, Councillor Garda's comment, I mean, the comment, we're all saying the same thing here, we're not disagreeing. I'm not into, oh, it was that person's fault. What I actually want to know is, why? Okay, and then the going forward bit is, if you want an IT system, is the IT system actually right for dealing with all that paper record that we've got? And the security issue is important. Because if it was the fact that it wasn't secure, then that's something that we should know as an ARGA committee, not to have a go at anybody, but just to say, look, it wasn't secure, so how do we secure it in the future? It's just those sorts of thoughts, and I certainly don't want to make a meal out of this, because it's actually, you know, done the job for us.
And I think that's why I'm being a bit pedantic in trying to get to the bottom of the question, to make sure that we don't make a meal out of it. So, can I just, before I ask Councillor Parker to speak, would it then help if we look at what were our protocols or processes for keeping the archive, and when were they effective? What was the governing rule around those, or the governing protocols around that? And where did responsibility for managing it lie, in terms of, you know, a department or a section? And if we were able to look at those areas, and then come back, you know, with a sort of, and again, I don't think it's necessarily to come back to the committee in a formal sense, but just sort of to help us understand what the lay of the land as it was, and therefore how the future system deals with those things, or how the proposed future system deals with it. Would that help? Councillor Parker is looking a little perplexed.
No, Chair, I'm not. I think that's the direction that we were asking for. What I wanted just to say was that there should be no suspicion as to the motives of requesting this. The thing for me is one of, this was a very important issue. But what alarms me is that we hear about reports being prepared, and we hear about looking at developing an electronic system. In between time, who's now managing this? For my part, it was a sort of like an immediate afternoon discussion between heads of services, and that says, this went wrong, right, Bob, now put it right, and Jack or Jill's in charge of it. And it might be a fundamental, and I know Councillor Harvey says he's banging on about something, I will say this again, and it actually gives me an opportunity to go back to the thing about late delivery of minutes. It may be a fundamental of staffing levels.
Okay, so what I propose then to move this forward is perhaps if we ask our internal audit team to look at our current process, which is still current until the new system comes in place, and as part of its normal review back to this committee, is able to give us a short report on the current systems and processes, how they operate, and how that then informs future requirement. Yep. If you're happy with that. Okay, thank you. Sorry to labour that one, but I just wanted to make sure we got that one right without seeming to be dismissive. Was there anything further, Mrs. Taylor? Or? No? Thank you very much for that one. That moves us on to paper C. And that is our Section 106 Developer Contribution Report. And I'm going to ask Mike to introduce that to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report has been brought forward at the request of this committee in June and then September of this year to cover the processes relating to the requirement for and the spend of Section 106 contributions, together with information on the balance of money, Section 106 monies held by the Council and details of any outstanding Section 106 debt owed to the Council. The report sets out the current processes following various audits that have been undertaken into Section 106 processing, which has resulted into a number of improvements. One key one being a monthly meeting of officers involved in the Section 106 monitoring and debt recovery, as detailed in paragraph 6.5 of this report. As reported to the performance panel on 15th of October of this year, the position on outstanding debt has improved significantly, as detailed from paragraph 6.1 through to 6.4. The appendices to this report sets out the Section 106 process as they stand today, and will clearly change over time as the Council moves towards the Community Infrastructure Levy 2014-15. Members are asked to note the details of the report as set out in paragraph 2.1.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any questions to begin with? Councillor Parker, and then Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to refer to page 22 of 93, which is page 416 of the report, appendix 2, section 5. And I'd first of all like just to establish, this is the heading which deals with how councils would know whether a development is subject to a 106 legal agreement. I'd like just to ask if I'm missing it on the planning application informative that we get as an email from the planning officers. Is there any indication on that first notice that indicates that there's a Section 106 contribution?
No, not at that time. So the consultation which comes out of the planning application doesn't include that. It is on the description of development as to whether a Section 106 may be required, and then through the scoping process that happens during that first 21-day consultation period that we give to members, that's when it's determined whether or not there is a requirement for Section 106. It's after that point that the scoping pro forma is put on the website, but no, in answer to the question, it's not alerted on the first consultation to councillors.
Can I then just further ask that is there a developing trend for the scoping process now to be dealt with at the pre-application stage?
As part of a pre-application, if it is a type of development that would trigger potentially a Section 106 agreement, then a scoping process is undertaken at that time, but it will be repeated at the application stage as well.
I'd like just to ask the officer a very simple question. What is the earliest stage the officer feels that members can be involved in a consultation process regarding scoping, allocation, spending and collection of Section 106 monies?
I think that would be through the planning application stage. There are some opportunities to get involved in the pre-application. There's a weekly list of pre-application which is circulated to members. Also on the major pre-applications, there's a pre-application panel meeting that members can ask pre-applications to be called to, albeit I think there's only been one so far to date. I think the issue in part is the difference between the scoping, the requirement for a Section 106, and to be clear, that doesn't set out how the monies will be spent. That just simply sets out the details that effectively allows the council to secure the Section 106 contribution in the first place. So although there will be details within that scoping sheet which may say, for example, open space contribution is required and it will be spent towards, that's simply to get the Section 106 agreed in the first place. There's then a separate process at the end, after the planning permission has been granted and the Section 106 agreement signed, for the expenditure.
Councillor Watts.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to pick up really from where we got to, because I've had an interest in this process defined from page 29 of 93 onwards since it first came through planning and infrastructure. It says somewhere in the paper that this has been reviewed this year. But, by whom has it been reviewed, amended and approved?
Yeah, I think the reference to the review this year was simply a refresher, if you like, to officers involved in the process of the flowchart set out on page 12 of 16. It wasn't intended to mean a review by members.
Well, dwelling on that chart, which I've been questioning ever since it started, I can see one change, which is a very sensible change, because on the top bubble on page 30 of 93, parish plan, town plan and neighbourhood plan is added there, and that's new legislation. And I've had many goes at this. To start with, can I ask how many parishes in the borough have a parish plan, town plan or neighbourhood plan?
I don't think I have the details to hand as to how many do. I didn't think there were any neighbourhood plans. I know there's been designations agreed for the areas, but I didn't think there's been any actual approved plans at this stage. I think the point the bubble, if you like, is trying to make is that if they are in place, that is one of the things that would then be taken account of in terms of the start of the scoping process to justify why a contribution may be required in the first instance.
Yes, well, that really is the point of my question, because I don't know the number, and I don't know what the number is, but it's very few. I see. Well, I think it's a small proportion of the total in the borough. But when we approved this in the first place, I didn't realise that in the absence of an approved parish plan, the parishes wouldn't have any say at that stage. In fact, of course, as a working alternative, Whitchurch has an interim town plan just to fill that gap, so that officers here can see what the town thinks are the Section 106 needs. But am I right in saying that in the absence of those plans, the parishes are not consulted at that stage?
Parishes aren't consulted at that stage of the process, but in the same way as anyone else, if you like, who is interested in the scoping pro forma, that is put on the website as part of the planning application process. It is publicly available, and if there is any discrepancy in that, say for example, either that a contribution wasn't being required because the officer's conclusion that there was no need, if the parish council had alternative information, that could certainly form part of their consultation response on the application. The timescales we put on the scopers to respond is within 10 working days of the application being received, so it's within the 21-day period that the parish council would comment on the application. So in theory, the scoping pro forma would be on the website, or should be on the website, before such time as the parish or town councils respond.
And is it possible for the scoping pro forma to be amended on comments from the town or parish council after the 10-day period?
It is, if the comments effectively met the SIL regulation requirements in terms of it being a necessary contribution, so on and so forth. So long as that new information still met those requirements, then yes, it would.
Well, I have to say that hasn't been the practice. In fact, I did one application actually go to the committee to oppose the recommendation because the scoping pro forma was so balmy on one particular point. I'm prepared to explain that if you want to take the time, but I don't think so. The practice, as observed, is that officers consider there isn't enough time to consult anybody in those 10 days, and after the 10 days it's not possible to change it. Could perhaps Mr. Townsend say whether that's not supposed to be the practice, and if we can all expect to amend pro formas after they've been put on the website?
That's certainly not intended to be the practice, so I can give that reassurance. I know there have been some instances where the need for a contribution has not been identified by the officers, and there has been some consultation then either with the parish or local ward members, effectively to double check that there isn't anything that they're not aware of, in case a contribution could be justified. But I would reiterate that if that justification did meet those sealed tests, then the scoping pro forma could be amended.
So could this chart be amended to show that then, please?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure where we're yeah, no, I see where we are with the process now, but I think what we're hearing is that the process is intended to secure the consultation or engagement of parish and town councils by virtue of by virtue of new legislation and the will of and wit of parish and town councils. The best way to secure or advance notification and interest in what's required is by developing a parish, town or neighbourhood plan, recognising not everybody has one of those yet, but there are both historic parish plans and developing neighbourhood plans. So I think this process aims to secure engagement by parishes and town councils actually stating what their plans are. The current process is that they do have notification via the website, and I know that there was some training earlier on this year or awareness sessions for parishes and town councils to secure their awareness of the current process and further up the level of their engagement. I'm not sure we want to amend a process to something that's by default. So if they miss the first option, therefore they have a second bite. It's really sort of focused on getting it right first time, and if they miss that first option, then really to make the case.
Well, I mean, missing the first option is a major issue because I think estimated to take 2 years to get a neighbourhood plan approved and agreed. And meanwhile, I am told that parishes will have an opportunity to propose amendments to the scoping document, but this process doesn't show that.
But you've gained assurances from the officer that is the case. If they make or put forward the representations, providing they're within the scope of the SIL requirements, then they will be considered.
So is it down to me to inform the parishes of that?
Well, as far as I'm aware, certainly my own parish, and I don't want to make this specific, but I am aware that awareness sessions were made available to parish and town councils earlier this year, because my own parish came back and were quite fired up having had the session. So I think it might be a case of going back to the parish clerks and seeing what their level of awareness already is. If they're not aware, actually inquiring them to make themselves aware of the process. But I don't want to make this. I don't want to make a generic good practice process to try and fit it to the requirements of maybe one or two areas. I think we do need to look at what are the gaps and how do we make those gaps aware of what they should be doing.
I don't want to upset any officers or corporate directors by mailing all parishes telling them that there's an additional process to the council, but I thought it might be better if that was done by the officers.
Can I just help, Chairman? I think I've just checked a piece of information, and we have 9 applications for neighbourhood plans, although I'm not quite sure how many are approved. Okay. Members, as you're aware, I host the parish liaison meeting, and Mike's already been once to run through with parishes around how the DC process works. We can offer them, absolutely, a masterclass and update on how this bit of the process works. But perhaps can I suggest, we've got some notes here. Mike, you just might be able to put a little, in addition to the notes, rather than a change the process, just to reference the reassurance that Mike's just given committee about that. Perhaps members might be helpful. Yeah.
Notes. Go on then.
I wanted to test, before the subject moves on, that I've advised parishes to create and maintain a shopping list of things they would like done if they ever get any Section 106 money from anywhere, and to share that with the borough council. And I don't know whether any of them have done so, but I think that's a more logical thing. The initiative should be with the parishes, because we can't resource anybody in the council to go out and have a discussion with somebody every time there's an application for a house, for example, and every new house creates Section 106 on a roof tax base, or whatever it's poshly called. And so parishes know if there's a new application, there will be some Section 106. If they haven't got a shopping list already of what they want, whether it's formalised as a parish plan or anything else, just to test with Mike whether the council would take note of a shopping list maintained by a parish council and sent to him.
I think we would. It would be on the same basis if it was still compliant and meets those tests. And I know that has been the case in the past. That has worked.
I think that makes sense. Thank you for the suggested amendment to the process, and certainly that's my parish operates on the same version as Councillor Mitchell. So I want to move on. I've got Councillor Harvey, then Councillor Gardner and Councillor Keating. So Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. Just on that point, the overlap, I think, of everything that's been said with what would be the statement of community involvement and engagement is key, because in my head, when you get to scoping from a developer's perspective, 9 times out of 10 they're beginning to set themselves in stone anyway. And so if you're a developer wanting to do business in Basingstoke, you need to have had those conversations with the parishes and with the communities long before you get to sticking in a scoping opinion. And then what I'd like to be assured of in the SCI is that we are encouraging developers to have those conversations to start with, to be as open as they can be with the parishes up front, and then from that, as Councillor Mitchell rightly says, you've got your shopping list. There should be some sense of coming within the scoping, saying, here we go, these are the conversations we've had. If it's positive, it may not be positive. It might be the parish saying we don't want this development. But if there is a positive conversation to be had, it should be had long before you stick in a scoping report. And even if it's negative, the developer's got a responsibility to engage with the local community anyway, so they can still make clear what they want. Just on that point, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Chairman. 3 questions and a comment. Can you confirm, or otherwise, my understanding that a Section 106 agreement cannot cover an existing deficiency? It can only cover the development requirements from the development.
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
So if a parish were to put together a wish list, it would be based on, in the event of a future development, what would you like that development to cover? At what point would a developer get his Section 106 money back if the council did not actually carry out the infrastructure improvements?
It will depend on any particular clauses. I think anything sort of much beyond 5 years, I think, would normally be a standard requirement. I know on the BEST, so the Basic Environmental Strategy for Transport Contributions, that's a 10-year cycle on the basis of those sums obviously pooled towards wider infrastructure.
Of the 2.4 million, how much of that is actually close to that period? And in particular, with the trimming strategy money, which we currently have unallocated, what future plans do we have for that?
I don't have the details on the amount that is close to, if you like, a trigger for refund at this time. I can take that away, Chair, if needed. In terms of the swimming contribution, the substantial proportion of that has only recently been paid. That was only paid in the last few months. So in terms of repayment, I think we're somewhere where yet.
And lastly, for Laura, there is a parish reception in January. It might well be an item for the agenda to actually advise members of the parish councils, as opposed to parish clerks, of what is available to them in terms of getting their requests in early.
Thank you. Councillor Keating next.
Thank you, Chair. I represent one of the wards that doesn't have a parish allocation. And if you look at the overall borough, you'll find that approximately 50% of the population in the urban area is not covered by a parish. So we don't get told anything that parishes get told, and there is no alternative mechanism for us to be updated. So that's a significant issue in my view. Secondly, can I just say, only those of us who are very well versed in planning and the rules in relation to scoping of that matter would ever know, and this includes me, whether there was 106 money available for our ward or not. Because we're not on planning, we're not necessarily up to date at which stage of the process any planning application is. And because we're not on planning, even if we go to the planning portal, we're probably banjaxed by the technicalities of it all. Banjaxed means it's a Welsh word, definitely. But confused is a good word for you, for yourself. So that's the other point. And I believe that there is a fundamental flaw in the process, whereby we councillors, certainly in the non-parish areas, actually end up never actually being told by anyone there's a development in your patch, there's 106 money associated with it, and we are planning to talk about this. So I believe that we should introduce an additional element into the scoping arrangement, call it what you like, the pre-application planning, the development of the plan, all of that kind of stuff. However many steps you've got, we need, as councillors, representing a significant proportion of the population who are not parished, should be notified, not be sent hunting through a planning portal to find information. Right? We should be told in a pro forma 106 contributions, Southam, project number so-and-so, 106 money, we're looking for it. Now, you might well say later, we haven't got it. But at least we're then informed of the prospect and the key to it. We're not told that, and I think it is essential we are told that. Additionally, I am currently a brand new chair of a partnership between two wards. My ward, Southam, and Buckskin. And we were requested to join two wards together to develop a partnership arrangement to eventually produce things like the equivalent of a parish plan, a community plan, and we'll be taking that forward relatively quickly. But I believe that that particular process should result in such developments, i.e. two wards together, being treated as if they were a parish for the purposes of communications between the council and all of its relevant bodies to those joint arrangements. Because the intention is that they will produce a community plan and they will therefore be connected to the relevant departments of the council. But apart from that, I've got nothing to say. Thank you.
I think I picked out a question out of there. No.
I'm not interested in your question.
No.
You what I have asked to happen.
And I absolutely get that. What I was going to, and when I sum up, I will sum that up in words of a question, if you don't mind, because I think that would help to get an answer. No, I'm not. No. No, I'm simply saying, Councillor Keating, that when we get to the end of the question stage, I will sum up some of the questions that this committee would like answered, and that will enable us to have a constructive debate if I've missed any of the points that we need to be made. Do you wish?
Chair, thank you. Just on one point, in terms of the issues raised by Councillor Keating, in terms of the money available from Section 106, there is information already available on the Council's intranet, which I understand is available to members. This sets out the amount of contributions held by ward, as I understand it. No, but it is. It is the amount of money available which is unspent so far. So it is effectively the available money, and it does split it by ward and by type of contribution, so open space and so forth. And I think that would be the place for it to remain, as opposed to it coming onto the planning application file per application. But that information is.
Got Councillor Leake and then Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chairman. I represent three parished areas, but I'm kept in the dark as much as Councillor Keating. Nobody has ever consulted me about any of the developments or the Section 106 requirements on any of the developments in my ward. I certainly don't recall it anyway. So I share that view, and I also want to comment on a point made by Councillor Harvey. I would like to know on some of the potential future developments, for instance, north of Marnell Park or Manydown, which parishes will be consulted, because both of those sites are either in the parish of Wootton St Lawrence or Sherburn St John. Now, Councillor J. Wardener has already chopped Sherburn St John off from gaining any monies from the new homes bonus, so I'm rather concerned that we might be chopped off from getting monies from Section 106. So I would like to know which parishes will be consulted, specifically on those two potential sites, because they are very, very important. I also wanted to just comment on something said by Councillor Parker, which I think was suggesting that we're not told initially, and then, but if you spend hours looking at the website, you'll be able to spot. Well, I don't spend hours looking at the website. I've got a life, I'm 72, and I'm enjoying myself, and I'm not prepared to spend 8 or 9 hours looking at somebody's website. I don't even know where Sinbad is. So I think it's the responsibility of officers to advise us that these things are going to happen, and I hope that will be the case, that we are actually consulted, that we don't have to spend hours looking for things that may or may not be there. That's quite true, but which will require us to do a lot of fishing. It's unnecessary. You're doing the work. You know whose ward it is. You can just tell us. Thank you very much.
Got Councillor Parker next, and then Councillor Garland.
Thank you, Chair. I'm still in question section. Right, thank you very much for your support. Excellent. I want to ask the officer here, present just now, on the flow chart. Oh, first of all, can I go to page 29 of 93 and just establish that at the bottom, page 10 of 16, where it says flow chart, would I be correct in assuming members should be entered into that sentence?
Yes.
I hope it will be for purposes of the operation of this process. I'd like to refer to the boxes on the left-hand side, which I've numbered on page 30 of 93, which I've numbered 1 to 6, and it refers in the top box, box 1. Officers evaluate community infrastructure needs associated with the proposed development. For purposes of identifying in the planning process, what stage are we at that point in time? Are we pre-application? Are we planning, scoping. Can we just identify what point of the process that is?
That is the start of the scoping process, whether that be at pre-application stage or application stage.
And so then it refers to notes 1 and 5, and note 1 quite clearly states, in addition to the parish council, liaison will occur with members. Is that what the officer believes is happening at present?
That is, and that reference to liaison with members is through the consultation on the planning application. That's the link.
I'm sorry. This specifically states here, officers evaluate the community infrastructure needs. It doesn't talk about planning application at all. Now, either this is misinformation or misunderstanding.
It's okay, Harris, you can do it yourself.
Well, the point being that the Section 106 flowchart will obviously only be relevant if there is a pre-application or application in place, so it has to be related to one or other process.
What I'm trying to drill down to, Chair, is if I read note 5 on page 31, the flowchart refers to C notes 1 and 5, and note 5 says that liaison will occur with local members. And I assumed that if I was reading that correctly, the inference there is that at that early stage there would be liaison, or is that notification? Maybe. Perhaps the wrong word.
In terms of the note that goes to note 5, which using the numbering of 1 through to 5, if you did number those boxes on the flowchart, by the time you get to 5, that is post-approval of the planning application. So effectively, that's the point at which the spending officers, so whether that be from the community team or whatever, would consult with the local ward members. The planning application stage, if you like, finishes at the point, so the third box down, where the completed Section 106 agreement is made. At that point after, it's into the monitoring and spending, which is beyond the sort of planning part, if you like, although the planning department still has that monitoring function.
So should the first top box then just have C note 1 in it?
Well, it can do, but I think that does take place in terms of the consultation on the planning application.
I'm getting a recurring theme, so I've got, Councillor Gardner.
It's a recurring theme again, I'm afraid. Sean made a request for non-parished areas for the members to be kept informed. I see no reason why parish areas, the members shouldn't be informed as well. We've picked up John's point.
I just say my cunning plan is that I know the town and parish clerks will tell me things I don't find out from the borough officers.
Okay, members, I don't have anyone else asking questions. Oh, sorry, I put you at the top of my list and I missed you out. Sorry, go on.
Thank you, Chair. Can I go back to 13 of 93 and ask about the 2.426 million that we've still got left in the fund? I'm presuming that is allocated to major and minor infrastructural schemes and major and minor heads of terms that will have already been agreed, or is that a fund to be allocated? And what I'm trying to work out is we've now got the overlap with SIL, so that's going to come through the process at some point, and we're going to have an overlap between what was major on 106 and what's going to be infrastructure major on SIL, as 106 only moves into site by site by site and the little things, because SIL will pick up all the big major highways and the big major implications. So I'm just trying to understand what's going, from an audit point of view, what's going to happen to that money and how are we going to follow through over that changeover with those 106 agreements and what status do they have? And that leads on to my second question, which is at the moment you have a position where if a developer decides for whatever reason, for viability, I can't fulfil the Section 106, therefore I wish to renegotiate my Section 106 with the council. On occasion that can be referred back to the planning committee for debate, and on a couple of occasions it has been, but SIL will not be negotiable. You will have to pay it. Does that mean that the minor Section 106 will continue to be negotiable, So the borough gets its big ticket items, but for example a parish that might have negotiated a playing field or something that comes out of the development, actually on a viability grounds in the future, that could then be renegotiated if a developer can prove a viability case. So the community could lose out, but the borough is secure because SIL's non-negotiable, if I've understood it right.
Chair, can I ask Sarah to comment on the financial side first, and I'll come back onto those other questions on SILs.
The 2.4 million, if you look at the last column on page 13 of 93, you'll see there's the purpose types. The bulk of the money that's left to be sort of allocated is clearly for social housing, swimming and transportation highways. The social housing is sort of earmarked for affordable housing, and that's tied in with a few specific Section 106s, so that will be sort of site specific. The swimming and the transportation highways ones tend to be sort of more borough-wide schemes and therefore future allocation. There will be, or is proposed to be, a swimming strategy. Some of the money I know does need to be spent on the aquadrome because it's tied into the terms of the 106. Again, the rest can be borough-wide. Unfortunately, I don't really know the answers to that question. Not yet. Sorry.
I think in relation to the questions on SIL and viability, I mean, I think the essence of SIL is obviously to ensure that the payments are viable in the first place. So you're right, there isn't a negotiation in the same way that there is a potential in a Section 106. Having said that, the number of negotiations on, or the number of viability reports submitted with planning applications, i.e. front-loaded with that information, has been relatively small in terms of the number of planning applications received. I'm not aware of post-approval of a planning application and a Section 106 having been agreed and signed, of a developer then coming back and seeking to change the terms post-approval. So I don't think that the concern around renegotiation when that was first introduced a couple of years ago doesn't seem to have come into regular issues for this council. In terms of the transition to SIL, I know that Andrew Hunter's team is doing work now on that basis, particularly around the ability to pool funds from more than 5 agreements at one time, but I don't know the detail of how that transfer will take place at this time. Equally, work is being done on the administration of SIL, so in effect transferring from the current monitoring and pursuit of debt on Section 106, similar steps and similar processes will be in place on SIL debt recovery. There are some similarities, but there are some quite significant differences as well, but that work is already up and running.
Thanks, Chair. I appreciate that. I think it's difficult at P&I because we've got so much going on there in the sense of the policy stuff to have the detail of this coming back. I mean, where in the world do you fit it all in? I mean, as a member, I'd like to understand, and maybe officers can come back to us in email or other form, of how we're going to deal with the 106 and SIL, because what I don't want is a situation where, because the 106 will become very community focused, how do we translate that into making sure all the debate we've just had on parishes and the rest of it, that we fulfil those aspirations through what will be far smaller 106 agreements, but also that the developers don't see that as the easy picking in a viability argument to say, well, I've got to deliver the SIL because I've got no choice, but I can renegotiate the 106, or I can negotiate the 106 during an application. And again, it's the immediate community, the community of disbenefit to the development that loses out. And then again, it's just maybe a bit more information in the future on how we deal with this money, because from an audit point of view, just trailing it through, it's obviously there's going to be an overlap, and it's how do we ensure that we do spend what we can spend within the rules that we're going to be operating under, the new rules that we're going to be operating under, against the old agreements, the whole heads of terms and legal agreements that we'll have signed up to. Appreciate that for that now. I appreciate a comeback.
Councillor Watts.
Can I move on? Sorry, can I move on to Appendix 3, please, Chairman? A simple question. Well, 34 of 93? Why does this not refer to the processes agreed through a single issue panel for Section 106 and viability calculations? I've got the report here. I can read bits of it to the committee if they like, but it is a part of that question. Really quite important issues. If I can read, the panel recommends that information concerning viability appraisal should be made available early on in the process and sufficient time to be made available in the process for members to respond to officers and for any concerns to be made available to develop control. The panel further considers the pre-application process and early engagement with developers should involve local members where viability is an issue, etc., etc. And then later in the report, the panel supports the use of DVS and other external assessors when determining viability. However, concern was expressed that the underlying detail of assessments should be available for review by a Development Control Committee and affected ward members if requested, mindful of the time constraints. None of that's reflected in here at all, but that is council policy how the single issue panel's report was accepted. Sorry.
Chair, there's no reason why the note can't be updated to include that information. In fact, those issues around and the responses of the single issue panel are worked out in practice. Again, as I mentioned in response to Councillor Harvey, there have been a fairly few number of applications that have included viability information, and certainly I don't think to the extent that was once envisaged following the initial sort of economic downturn. But there's no reason why that note can't be updated to include those points.
And I've got Councillor Leake.
Yes, I just wanted to pick up the point about the one of the major items where we haven't spent the money, namely the social housing, because we've just been told it was site-specific, but presumably this is where we've received contributions rather than the housing being provided on the site. And I do see there's a sort of explanation, and I'm afraid my recollection is not sufficiently good to remember what was approved by Cabinet in June 2012, and I'm delighted to see officers are currently working with registered providers to work up proposals, but can we have some indication of where these sites are and where the money might be spent? Because I think that would be of interest to members. We seem to spend a lot of time discussing affordable housing, or the lack of it, and we have £750,000. It'd be quite nice to know when we might be spending it. Sorry? That was where I was coming, but I just want to get the answer first.
Chair, I can't answer on the actual where it will be spent, but certainly in terms of the reason why it was taken off site in the first place and the vast majority of that sum, I think in the region of I think it was £705,000 from it was from the Webbers McCarthy and Stone development in Basingstoke. The reason it was taken as an off-site in accordance with the council's SPD was that there were particular operational reasons as to why it wouldn't have been able to provide that on-site, but it was taken on the basis of a town and then Basingstoke-wide off-site contribution which could be spent on affordable housing.
That would be enormously helpful, because I was going to ask a supplementary saying, could you please explain what you mean?
I was say, are you able to offer any more information, Mike, or shall I ask for? Because both Councillor Harvey and Councillor Parker wish to speak, so. Okay. Councillor Parker.
Well, I might have made a wrong assumption about off-site and on-site. But more pertinent to the debate, Chair, is the point that I want to make as one of the ward councillors. That decision was made without any consultation with ward member.
But you were going to clarify what it all means. Can you just do that? Or, oh, well, the officer.
I can certainly try and clarify what it means. It's essentially because the development triggered a requirement for affordable housing, the norm would be the 40% provision of affordable housing on site is our starting point. In this particular case, there was a case made as to why that couldn't be provided on site for the operational reasons regarding the particular type of accommodation provided on site, and therefore an equivalent off-site contribution was taken to be able to re-provide that affordable housing elsewhere within Basingstoke. So instead of providing it as affordable units on site, the contribution was taken in lieu to be able to provide it off site.
And who makes the decision as to where it is to be spent? Bearing in mind it was originally, oh, I'm sorry, how much? It was originally, I assume, an eavesdrop.
Will that essentially be through the programme that's referred to in the paper in terms of the expenditure of that money approved by Cabinet? So 5.22, Council's approved set priorities and mechanism for releasing funds approved by Cabinet in June 2012. So that will effectively be through that process, but I don't have any involvement in that particular part, and I can't provide any further comment as to how it will eventually be spent.
2012 is 15 months away. It seems quite a long time to actually come up with a plan when we know there's a chronic shortage of housing, but there we are.
Yeah, Councillor. Yeah, no, it's an observation. Councillor Harvey, you're on
Thank
the
you very
same
much,
line.
Chair. I'd like to pick up a train of questions along this line, because I think what's been said raises some serious alarm bells in my head. We've got £744,000, £705,000 that we've had for some considerable time, as has been already said. Not a penny of it's been spent. We have major sites coming forward for development in the town centre. I've got one in my ward, just up the road from where Stuart's been talking, in Lilly. And that site's being proposed by one of our major housing partners. Now, the bit that I can't work out is where I link the money taken in Section 106 for affordable housing to a decision made by the Cabinet, to officer implementation of that decision, to actually seeing affordable housing being delivered on a site, for example, being delivered by Sentinel, where we have an opportunity to work with one of our social landlords to deliver quite a bit more affordable housing than we would otherwise get, because it's one of our social landlords, it's not a private developer as per se. Now, I can't join the dots, and at the moment, the officers aren't joining the dots for us. And that's worrying, because as part of this going forward, if we're going to have 106 and we're going to have SIL, what I can't work out or justify is how in the world, from Stuart's point of view, he has to, in a sense, give up the benefit of the £700,000 to go into a central pot, and an executive member decides how it gets spent, but doesn't really, because we've been sat on it for 15 months. The officers aren't willing to spend it on affordable housing because we're told, well, we haven't got a scheme we can spend it on yet, or we don't think that's viable, we're not willing to spend it in that area, even with one of our own social landlords. So I just think there's a really big issue here of delivery of affordable housing and the spending of that money to achieve the aim it was taken for, 15 months after we took the money off of the developer. Now, I'm not sure where to go with this. I really don't know where to go with this, Chair. I don't know whether you can help me or who can help me. But I'm just conscious, you know, Stuart's given up the money from his site. I've got a massive site. The biggest site. Lilly is the biggest site inside the town. It's the biggest development site we've got inside the town. Yeah, and in a sense, why isn't that money being spent somewhere? Or why aren't we spending it on another site? Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you 100%. I really am. And I'm concerned, Mike, in terms it's got nothing to do with you anymore. Because the planning department's got nothing to do with you. Is it housing? If it's housing, what in the world are they doing?
I was just saying, I don't see any, or I don't have any further. Yes, Councillor Mitchell. Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. Yes. Okay. So, is there any other questions? Councillor Gardner, you've got a question.
No, it's not another question, but just a declaration of interest. If we are discussing Sentinel, then I will declare that I am the council representative on their board.
Thank you. Okay. So, before we go into debate, I just want to sort of get my head round some of the direction of travel and in the current questions being asked, just so that we're clear of what questions we've got on the table and where we might send them. I think there was a series of questions which started the ball rolling in terms of our process flow in the appendix, and that was really around how members and then town, parish and neighbourhood level would be able to input into the process, and we had some discussions around whether people had parish or neighbourhood plans, which made sense. If they've got defined plans or they're progressing plans, then it's an indication of their intent or their wish list. In absence of that, then actually just simply developing a wish list and making officers aware that it exists would be a useful way forward. I think then there was a sort of further iteration of that, which is, well, how can town areas which are not currently covered by parishes actually get access to the same information, guidance, and support as given to yeah. And I think there was general support from the committee. I was getting, I've seen lots of nodding heads, which was basically, we would all like to be in the same position, irrespective of whether you're a parished area or not, in terms of understanding what is being potentially allocated or scoped or sought on behalf of a particular area, and then how a local democratic representation and indeed local neighbourhood representation was able to influence both that early scoping of requirement as well as the future spending of the monies. I think there was some lack of clarity between the process we've got within the appendix and how that fits to the different planning stages. And again, the questioning behind that was exactly the same. Where and when do people get involved? And at the moment it's confusing because there's a need to get involved as a member of the Borough Council as part of the planning process. But that's not always overlapped with or aligned with the earlier engagement that you might want through the Section 106 process. So there's a general theme here about understanding the clarity of the current process and how it laps in with both planning and then general consultation, neighbourhood and area, to understand how people get involved in that process. That's going to be made more complicated by knowing that SIL's coming in and what and how is being offered through that slice of funding. I think we were getting to then towards the end of our discussion was really, whilst the paper here and certainly the paper we had previously through EPP has helped to identify what potential funding is available now, let alone what's coming in the future, but what's available now, then there are some genuine questions to be asked and answers to be sought in relation to where that money's going, when it's going to be spent, and the timeliness of it being allocated, given that some of the funding here matches very clearly with council plan priorities and a demonstrable need for affordable housing. So I think sort of in terms of the key themes that are developing here, the committee feels somewhat adrift from understanding the processes, how they sit together, yes, external to them, right? Okay, I'm happy with that wording. That it is therefore difficult for us to influence on behalf of our communities what's required and where the money is spent, and then even worse, to know that money currently exists and is not being spent. And yeah, absolutely. I think there were two very specific questions about the 2.4 million and its closeness to the 5-year trigger. And in fact, I think that's a very relevant question if there's other money that is sitting there and we don't know or are not able at the moment to influence it being spent in a timely fashion. And there was also a further question about the recommendations from the single issue panel being wrapped into the process, because those, particularly in relation to the viability assessment, and once I understand the officer team have agreed that can happen. Again, it's just trying to join the dots between conversations happening at various committees and at a local level into an overall policy to make sure the money we have available to us is actually spent on the plans that we have prioritised. I'm left then wondering, there are some things here that we can deal with at a process level, but in terms of where the bigger question goes, is that a question that we, because we are actually noting this paper, and I don't want to preclude you from your debate, which we can have in a second, but in terms of where this goes, as part of this note, are those questions directed to Cabinet? Or to the portfolio holder? I'm looking for help here in terms of where do you want this, because I believe it's too important to sit just with us and not quite sure where to direct it. So I'm looking for some suggestions on where we send it.
Just what I understand to have been the issue in respect of that affordable housing money is just an example, and I was just looking for it in terms of Cabinet making its decision and it going through in June 2012. is then the issue of, well, how is that then implemented? Because, all right, Cabinet makes the decision, but 15 months later, we ain't spent the money, and the officers, and I'm not criticising anybody, all I'm saying is it hasn't been spent. And when an opportunity has presented itself on a site, for example, that Sentinel and it's not the only one, I'm merely using it as the illustrative example, we haven't done a thing, and actually, in some ways, it's been resisted to spend money on the affordable housing, and we've been resisted as ward members when we've put it forward and said, hey guys, there's an opportunity here, we can really do something here. Oh, I'm terribly sorry, councillors, we can't spend it there. Or we can't think outside the box to deliver it. Now, if not there, then where? Because that 700 grand is sat there waiting to be spent, and I don't just think it is a Cabinet issue in that respect, Chair, because Cabinet's already made the decision. This is an implementation issue, so I'm not quite sure where it sits and resides. So I guess my question would be related to whoever, officer or member, actually decides how the money is spent. I guess that's the point I'm trying. I'm not sure at that respect. I appreciate guidance on who. But if they've already made the decision to spend it, I'm not blaming them or having a go, because they've already made the decision to spend it. So why isn't it being spent? If they've made the decision, which is on the books, quite clearly so, it's a question of why isn't that being implemented? And would the Cabinet member know that?
Councillor Keating, while I'm thinking.
Thank you, Chair. We're currently spending big bucks sending people who are homeless out of the borough. We're sending people to Slough, 40 miles there and 40 miles back. And that's housing, I can assure you. So if we can't spend it on building houses or helping others to build houses, we could certainly spend it on housing issues. But can I just make sure that we understand?
Please.
Can I just make sure we understand? I do not feel compelled by a recommendation that we notice something. I believe we can make other decisions in addition to those things arising from our discussion. So noting it is not an issue for me. Secondly, can I just ensure that there is an absolute need to ensure that the department that deals with 106 and CIL monies should notify members as and when they're dealing with it in their particular ward. We should not have to be sitting, waiting and monitoring computer screens or backgrounds to computer screens. Say, have they made any decisions yet? We cannot do that because there will be good decisions because these things are delayed or left or whatever. So we need to be upfront in accordance with the note in here, which was number 5. Was it 5? Was it? I forget.
Page 31.
Page 31, I beg your pardon. In accordance with item 5 on page 31, in addition to Parish Council, liaison will also occur with local members. That needs to be happening now and forevermore in future. I have never been notified of a 106 contribution by anyone for any purpose. And if I had, it was buried somewhere that I wouldn't even know how to find it. And I don't expect, as an experienced ward councillor, to get to that point. I believe we have an entitlement to be told in writing, I have to add. It is essential also that we clarify and confirm that community partnerships in non-parish areas will be treated as parishes for the purposes of notification in addition to the individual notification to members. It seems to me, Chair, that the only people who are currently involved in these decisions are officers. They're making decisions about scoping, and they're the professionals. And I don't expect to substitute for them. But I do believe we have rights to be notified of their decisions as and when they're made, not after the event. Now, I don't mean as when they're made, and by the way, we notify members 2 minutes later, but notify members within a reasonable time of the decisions. But apart from that, I've got nothing to say. Thank you. And that's not for noting. That's not for noting. That's for action.
Thank you, Councillor Keating. If you could pop your light off for me then and give Councillor Parker a chance. Councillor Parker, sorry, yes. Sorry, I'd summarised questions. We are now formally moving into debate. Yes, so the Councillor Keating kicked our debate off. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Chair. There is going to be an element of repetition here, and I'm going to make no apology for that, because this point has to now be listened to. Because I recall that this very aspect was an issue and a mystery probably 6+ years ago, and discussed in this very committee, and with a request that the possibility of ward member involvement at the earliest possible stage, that request was made. And to pick up now on a point that was just raised by Councillor Keating, this report is at the request of this committee, and to be asked as the committee just to note it without comment, we need to stop that. That must not be the case. It must not be the recommendation. That recommendation needs to be to note and comment on the report, is my view. I noted here, and it is this repetitive theme, we require as members, regardless of what this report is saying, we require as members the earliest stage notification and engagement relating to Section 106 money. I rather feel that consultation here, it's starting to be, in my experience, in the business of this council, the most misused word. I think in this instance, consultation means sharing. We'll share with you what we're going to do with this money and what projects we're going to spend the money on, rather than what would you like to be involved in the conversation as to what might be appropriate to spend this money on, and how much and where and when. And so I also, to pick up on the point made by Councillor Leek, and my note here was at a very early stage, we require, in addition to early engagement as ward members, we require regular updates, and we should not have to spend time referring links to Sinbad and other internal organisations. And I have to say it because it's so important. This seems to be now a trend developing here, where I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding as to the role of ward members. We're not sat at our computers all day to be able to link in and link back. And when do we decide to go to Sinbad to have a look? Do we do it weekly? Do we do it daily? Do we get the right time? Do we link in and then find out that the decision's been made the day before we link in? We need to have that proper update. And it's not beyond the realms of officers dealing with this, just adding a link into members that gives them a prompt, and it's flagged up that there is going to be Section 106 and how much is being negotiated. Because from my understanding and my questioning of the officer, a lot of that decision is already made at the pre-application stage.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mitchell and then Councillor Leek.
It's old age. It certainly is in my case. We really have got to get the answer to what is this £740,000 being spent on or not, and why. If it's not, why not? My assumption had been, when I read the paper, and I may be completely wrong, but thinking what might that be, I had assumed it was earmarked for affordable housing, social housing in our regeneration schemes. but maybe that's wrong. That's a sensible way in which it could be used, because the regeneration schemes cost money and won't of themselves deliver social housing without it being funded by somebody. And national funding for it is, as we know, scarce. So that may be wrong, but it's a possible explanation. But we should know, shouldn't we? We shouldn't have to ask. It may be buried in a paper somewhere. Just reflects what Shaw was saying. The Sinbad thing, unless it's changed dramatically, because I looked at it quite a long time ago, is one of these spreadsheet jobs which is almost impossible to get your head round. I mean, I know about spreadsheets and I find it very difficult. And I don't think it's a suitable, if it's not been dramatically improved, it's not a suitable vehicle for members anyway. So it's one of these things that hides the information rather than revealing it. Not deliberately, it's just how it happened to be done at the time because of the systems that were then available. It may have dramatically improved, but we do need to check that. And I agree with those who said that there should be a preemptive thing. And if it's on a proper system, the preemptive thing, rather like the planning application things, should be automatic. It should be natural and automatic. We are told about prospective Section 106 agreements because we are told about all planning. Can I finish what I'm saying before I'm interrupted? We are told about them because we're told about all planning applications. If you get a planning application that includes one net new house, you get Section 106 money. It's automatic. Most people doing a net one new house sign the automatic form. I'm doing a net one new house and I signed the form and spent the money, paid the money. Because you've got to pay the money before you get your planning application agreed, right? So we do know, if you get any planning application for houses, there is Section 106. So your pre-application notification will tell you this is a pre-application for 3 houses. There will be Section 106 negotiation. So we do know that. And in my view, I mean, it's easy for me to talk because I've got 6 parish councils looking after these things. And I don't expect to understand my enormous geographical areas, so I rely on the parish councils to advise me if they need any help with this. And if they weren't getting what they think they ought to get, I'm sure I'd be told about it. So I'm assuming that with my parishes all is well. I do seem to get asked about the spending of the money because I get a message now and again saying we're proposing to fund so-and-so with this Section 106 money from here. Do you agree? Now, maybe I'm the only councillor who ever gets asked that question. Why that would be is a mystery. I do advocate, and I'd quite like this to go in the notes. I do advocate that where we have a parish council or indeed a community association, and I was pleased to read in here the word community association to be consulted because I'm totally in favour of that. Where we have a non-parished area with a community association, they should be engaged, but I do say to my parishes, it is up to you. Don't expect the officers to phone you about something in a planning application. You tell them. You see it coming, you say, well, if there's Section 106 money, don't forget we want to do this, this and this. I do very strongly advocate for community associations as well as parish councils having a shopping list and sharing it with officers. Now, I'll check now, having had this meeting, I'll check with my parishes whether they've done that, and I'm continuing to do so, and if they're not, I urge them again to do that. Because that gives, they're not, parish councils in particular, I'm sure community associations the same, can't suddenly have a meeting when they hear about a planning application in order to think about what we might use this. Because when they have a planning application, their primary focus is do we agree with it or object to it? And if we don't like it, why? And if we do like it, why? And that's what they do, and that's what takes their energy. So unless there's a shopping list, it won't happen. I was very disappointed that, as Mike mentioned right at the beginning, we introduced a scheme in which any member can ask for a pre-application engagement process with any major development, which is not a big development, anything over 10 dwellings. Only one member has taken advantage of that, and it was a very, very useful meeting indeed, very useful meeting to have the developer and the officers and members concerned about it in the same room at the same time before a planning application was made, and the planning application that resulted was different from what would have happened if we hadn't had that meeting. Improved. No member, it's been available for a year, no other member has taken advantage of that. We've got a planning application coming to DC this week, next week, where the parish council concerned and the members concerned are complaining they haven't had enough opportunity to engage with the developer. They did not ask for a pre-application engagement. Now, they may have asked, and the developer may have said, no, I don't want to do that. But the only time we've done it, the developer was keen to engage, because he was keen to get an easier run of it when it got to DC. Now, we still object, we still turn applications down, we still object to them, but why nobody's using that process, and this is a big application coming to DC next week, nobody asked for a pre-application engagement. I'm amazed. I almost rang up the members concerned to say, are you deliberately not asking for this? Why? You know, it seems mad to me. So I really, again, would like that. Maybe we'll send a message out to members all over it.
Yes, I know. Councillor Leake, you're next.
Mike may not have got the impression, but actually I thought this paper was extremely helpful. You might have thought to the contrary from what has been said, but I think it just proved that we really did need this. And I would like to suggest that a copy of this paper and of our recommendations be sent to all members so they all see it. Because there's always an assumption that members are going to be watching this on a webcast or reading the minutes or whatever. Well, we don't. Let's be quite honest, we don't have the time. And I think this is so important. We've all learned something today, and I would like to make that one of my recommendations, that this paper and our recommendations, and I don't know quite how it goes forward from there, but you're thinking about that, Chairman, go to all members, and I would like also that the appendices or appendixes or whatever they call it in America are sent to the parish councils and to the community associations so they can see the process as well, and then there's no excuse for anybody not knowing how it all works. Thank you very much.
I've got Councillor Harvey next.
Thank you, Chair. Just pulling the threads together for your comment about extra points. £884,000 was originally allocated out of capital budgets for affordable housing from this council's resources. £744,000 was allocated for the Section 106 from Webbers and other sources. That gave us a combined pot of £1.628 million. At the moment, I understand that about £200,000 has been spent out of that overall pot over the past 15 months. So there's about £1.5 million roughly left that we haven't touched, and that raises issues of deliverability because we've only delivered 40 affordable units roughly in the past year out of a target of 300. So just thinking of the audit and governance point of view, here we have targets that we're not meeting, we've got money sat that we're not spending. And the processes, it was interesting to look at the Cabinet decision, taking an opportunist approach, taking the opportunities that present themselves. Alternative and innovative initiatives need to be examined. Delivering against affordable rented units, so actually delivery of units was a key priority, and renting cat levels to socially rented levels was an issue because it was recognised that the affordability was a key and where the money could make a difference. It was also noted that in the scheme of things, the Cabinet member and whoever would be the implementer of the scheme would look to those areas of unmet housing need. Now, for me, if any area shows that, it is the town, amongst other communities, but the town is one such area. And in that sense, where it is realisable, potential for new affordable housing can be delivered. Well, if you've got a 500-unit site sat in the middle of the town centre, you tell me, will it join the dots up? And what I'm concerned about and would like to capture, Chair, in your recommendations going forward is that there has been no scrutiny of that. There is no examination of that because we obviously can't call the decision and it's a made decision. So I would like to examine how we might go about examining the spending of and the prioritisation of and the use of that money, and why 15 months down the line we haven't, bearing in mind all of those points I've just made, which I think are pretty important, really.
Councillor Parker.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to comment in relation to something that Councillor Mitchell said, I'm not wishing to give the impression that there's no communication, but I don't consider to be told that this money is going to be spent on this project. I don't consider that to be consultation. I'm not saying I haven't received that sort of communication. I would prefer, possibly, at an earlier stage, to have decided whether that total amount of money should go to that one organisation or that one feature, whereas maybe with my ward knowledge there might be a desire to have those monies shared with other organisations. So I go back to, like I say, I think consultation it isn't a sort of a advisory. It should be actual engagement. But I do pick up on the point also that Councillor Mitchell has made, and I do remember him reminding us of this feature, I think by email, and I think I did respond to that advisory and said thank you for that. But I think it's something that is being forgotten in relation to pre-application engagement. And I thank him again for reminding us of that today. But maybe a way forward would be on the planning application advisory that we get via the email on site specific. We're asked to, if we have any representation to make that by a certain date. Maybe something could be added that actually says request for pre-application engagement should be received by, and give a time. And that will, again, when you're reading that application, that will remind you of that facility. But then unless, if I may just finish by saying, unless maybe in planning terms, it might not be perhaps desired for us as the local authority to be inviting that sort of engagement. And that's not a criticism, that's just an observation.
Comment. Thank you very much for those comments. But it's too late at the application stage. When you get a notice of the application, it's too late for pre-application engagement. It has to come out. And it's a very good idea, in my view, that on the letter or on the email that attaches the list of new pre-apps, then you put a reminder saying if, and don't forget that if any of these which is over 10 houses, you can ask for a pre-application engagement. That is a very good idea. Thank you.
Yeah, again, Chair, I do thank Councillor Mitchell for that clarification. It was the list that we get. We get now, at one time we got the greens, as I remember it, in paper form. We now get sort of like about 5 files: enforcement, planning applications, planning decisions, and pre-applications. Yes, you're right to make that clarification. Thank you.
Yeah, we've got Councillor Keating, and then I'll sum up, I hope.
There was reference earlier to community organisations being referred to as in communication terms, but there's another category which is partnerships, which should be in the same list of arrangements.
Right. Let's have a go at this then. Well, in terms of summing up, yes, I think we're making it clear that members require a more accessible award-based profile of Section 106, and in future SIL funding in their area, or potential rather SIL funding in their area that enables early information, sight of what's available, and then engagement in the scoping and determination of how that funding might be used in a local area. And I think for members there, I mean, that includes sort of democratic membership at parish-based level as well. And I'll come back to expand on that in a second. I think there's a view of this committee that we need to understand why substantial sums of Section 106 have been decided upon or allocated, but as yet not implemented. And questions raised about how the delivery of the funds into real schemes can actually be managed and monitored. Again, I'll come back to that. That we require regular updates and progress on the Section 106 funding, and that's published in order that we can monitor it. Because again, I think I pick up the point that Councillor Leek made. In ARGA asking for this report to come to this committee, it's provided a degree of transparency and information that just previously hasn't existed. And that's been exceptionally helpful. Unfortunately, it's raised lots of questions, but they are good questions to raise, because I think it's, as we progress down sort of a more local-based involvement in funds are available and how they are spent, then we can only do that if we've got information. So I think lots of the questions this afternoon and the debate enabling us to gather information and then involve ourselves in the process, therefore, is very helpful. I think we commented that we want to ensure that democratic representation gets consistent information and guidance, irrespective of whether that's a parish or non-parished area. And that should also include properly formed community-based partnerships. So where people are coming together to involve themselves in a community-based plan, irrespective of their current boundaries, then they should be able to have a voice and be represented and actually have a say in where funds are properly used. There was a helpful suggestion that members should use the current process of pre-application engagement with the developers, and the suggestion that this be included as a prompt or reminder when pre-application lists are sent out to members, making them aware, or consistently making them aware and reminding them of that process. I think there's the recommendation about SIP viability assessment. I've already made that, but I think that's something that is sort of mechanical and certainly can happen. I think we also asked as a committee that the paper that we have discussed this afternoon is shared with all members. Yeah.
But others may disagree, but I just,
Well, no,
you do agree.
I think if we found it helpful, I wonder also, though, if coming back to the sharing it with all members will raise the questions as indeed it's raised in our minds. I wonder whether we should also not share the paper and the comments with the senior leadership team, because at the end of the day, it's both the head of resources that has the responsibility for looking after money that's allocated and sitting on the books, but it's also the head of our operations and governance, our sort of two representatives there, who have the responsibility for making sure that things that are decided by Cabinet and monies taken off developers and held in our accounts are then actually spent on projects that deliver outcomes in the community. So I think perhaps our next recommendation is it goes to SLT as well. I think there was also the view that Appendix 2, which is the sort of the meat of the current process, be shared with existing parish town councils so that they are reminded of the process that's available. And I also pick up the fact that if that meeting in January of the parish councils were to take another opportunity to make them aware and the community associations aware of what currently exists and how they might get involved. Councillor Gardner, I saw you had an additional point.
It was just before you mentioned the referral to SLT. I was going to suggest that we send copies to the Chief Executive and the Leader of the Council for comment.
Yeah. Certainly, I think it goes to so is it to SLT and the Cabinet or the Leader? Yeah, the Leader. Yeah, happiness. Okay, to the leader then. Okay. Have I missed anything, members? No. So our view is that the paper and those comments are circulated, and specifically to the to all members and to the yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for the report. Excellent. I think that takes us to the end of paper C, and on to paper D. Councillor Keating.
Please accept my apologies. I need to leave at this time.
Thanks, Mike.
I don't have any significant issues on the remaining two papers anyway. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Keating. Right, that takes us to paper D, and I look to Dean to introduce that one to us.
Thank you, Chair. This is paper D. This is the mid-year report, which is part of your normal regular monitoring of the Treasury Management function. It takes us up to the end of September and also forecasts to the end of the year. It's the same report that is going to Cabinet and onto full Council in accordance with the Treasury Management Code of Practice. In summary, it shows that we are forecasting to be £316,000 below our target income of 3.4 million. This is almost entirely due to the fact that we haven't done any new long-term investment this year. We're still in the progress of reviewing our long-term Treasury cash investment strategy, and there's a workshop next week for audit members on the 26th to look at some of the options in terms of what we can do with our long-term cash strategy, and look to ways to fill the gap, as it were, and to improve our returns. In terms of changes from previous reports, you may notice that this time we've included our share equity investment that we now have with MWR, who are the sort of company that 3EN invested in, and we've inherited that investment from the 3EN partnership, and those are included within the Treasury Management investments. You may also notice on the benchmarking, which is in Appendix 3, that we are no longer the best performing in terms of risk and return. We did have a look at, or we asked about what the best performing is actually doing that's different to what we do, and it turns out what they're doing is something that our strategy won't allow, which is basically they're investing in other local authorities for 20 years. So if you've got any questions about the report, I'll do my best to answer them.
Thank you, Councillor Leake.
One question, one comment. The comment, that is on para 6.3, page 44 of 93. I noted in the appendix that we had two deposits with Middlesbrough Council, totaling 6 million. That's on page 53. And my first reaction was, not sure that I'm terribly keen, as I think I've expressed in the past, and therefore I was a little bit concerned about para 6.3. Other local authorities are deemed to be of very high credit quality due to their tax-raising powers. Well, that I think is how Iceland went pear-shaped. There was an assumption that 360,000 people could raise billions and billions of guarantees. And bearing in mind all councils are capped when it comes to tax, and bearing in mind the ability or inability of residents to pay a lot of additional tax, then I question whether they are quite such high-quality depositors or borrowers as is suggested here. I wouldn't want to see personally too much going into any one particular council, because I just don't think they have the ability to repay as is suggested here. And then my question is relates to paragraph 15.3 on the subject of training, where it tells me that the Cabinet had a training session, and I would like to know, were there any members of the Cabinet who did not attend that training, please?
As I understand it, that was when it says training, that was we basically took an options report on delivery of a new strategy to the Cabinet, and I believe, well, I don't know who actually attended, but from looking around the room, there appeared to be the majority of them there.
That isn't quite the answer I'm expecting. I would like to know specifically which Cabinet members did not attend. Thank you.
Sorry, I stand corrected. There was a formal training event for the Cabinet, and I can get back to you in terms of who actually attended, if you would like that information.
That's very kind, because I do think it's extremely important that all members of the Cabinet understand this. We spend a lot of time looking at it, but at the end of the day, they're the people who actually make the decision. And I think it's very important that... Yes, absolutely fine. And I'd be grateful for a brief comment about not specifically Middlesbrough, but the concept of lending too much to anyone but council.
Before we get to that, I'm aware that we've got the session on the 26th for this committee, and I have invited Cabinet to join us on that session. Again, as a further to raise sort of again their further awareness and understanding of the issues that we deal with, but also I think it'd be productive to share our thoughts as we get sort of information given to us. That Cabinet are also there to get the same information, so we're starting from the same point in terms of the options for the future Treasury management strategy. If you want to answer the question about Middlesbrough, or sort of, do you have a view that you wish to share?
Yeah, I mean, our generic view is we have our advisors are in close, and we take our own view as well. But basically, the logic, I suppose, behind stating that local authorities have a very high credit rating is because of the sort of legislative underpinning that they have in terms of they have to set a balanced budget. There's the Prudential Code, which means they can't borrow unless they can afford it. That any debt with an authority has equal ranking, so we're in the same at the same level as the taxman and everybody else. And basically, the local authorities are not allowed to mortgage their properties. So there's most of the local authorities will have substantial amounts of fixed assets other than their normal sort of revenue, income and expenditure, which ultimately, if they were struggling, you would be able to go in and effectively seize those assets. So, and also they have access to borrowing from the PWLB, so the government support there in terms of allowing them to borrow. So there's all of those things which sort of allow the sort of professionals to form the opinion that most local authorities are pseudo-government in the sense of their security.
I don't doubt all of that, but it's the ability to raise taxes that I was specifically raising, because I don't think that ability is there.
Go on then.
I share John's concern about that, and it's something I picked up in the report. There was, I mean, everything in the newspapers is wrong, as we all know, but there was a quite plausible newspaper report in a leading national paper just the other day about one particular city council, large city council, which was very close, which is at the moment very close to not being able to balance its books. And they use words like bankrupt, but my concern is not that you might not eventually get the money back. My concern is that in the process of somebody going into some sort of trouble of that nature, and I think there are quite a few councils who are close to it, and no idea about the ones that are listed here, but there may be no absolute risk of never getting your money back, but it might not be the ideal place to have your money, because you are then going to, along with other creditors, incur costs in getting your money back. and effort and time, which is better to invested in other ways. So I do share that concern, and I think one would want to look at the specifics of individual councils and only be lending to those who look as if they're in very good shape to carry the debt that they're carrying from us and everybody else they're carrying debt from.
Yeah, I think we can probably explore the risk of lending to other local councils at next week's session, if we wish, as well, in more detail. Councillor Parker, I had you next.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. I mean, this is the one only sort of point that I had a note down for myself. And I wanted specifically just to ask, in relation to local authority bonds and loans to local authorities. We've got the two different form of investment. Is any one more secure than the other? Or what's the leading desire, to have it as a deposit or to have an investment in a local authority bond?
My understanding is that any investment in a local authority has equal security, so it doesn't matter whether it's a loan or a bond. They are equally liable for those. So the only reason we have some local authority bonds is those were historical bonds that we did probably 15-20 years ago, and you know, they're not something which many local authorities do, because they, in order to issue bonds, they have to go and get a credit rating and spend a bit of money in terms of doing that. Most local authorities would be looking at loans rather than bonds, but there is quite a lot of inter-authority lending and borrowing. Always has been.
Can I continue to comment, or are we still on question?
If it's on the same point, then I'd rather take it now.
It is, thank you, Chair. For purposes of just making a point, I would highlight that we have. I understand the advantage of the long-term bonds that we've had invested, and they look good against anything else at the moment, as long as we can access our capital in 2019. The point that is being made is the difficulty in grading as an asset, and for me it's no comfort to know that we sit with everybody else as an investor instead of being a preferred investor. So the potential is that we could be equal with everybody else and get nothing back. And there's, if you take the 5 million investment we've got in Swindon Borough Council right now, they currently have an advertisement in the Telegraph inviting applicants to take over the operations of all their 19 leisure complexes on a 99-year lease. But more interestingly, within the report on their website, is that there's currently 6 million repairs required on those assets. 1 million being declared as urgent. And so, you know, there is, perhaps as an investor, concerns. Not only that, as far as our own ratepayers, there is this very question of whether we loan money to other local authorities on the basis of assisting them to provide services for their residents, as opposed to maybe some other area. And there was, I think the point's been made that the desirability of holding this as a form of investment. And I just wonder how regularly we have a sort of a monitoring of potential loss or not in regard, because there's no doubt that some local authorities have been under pressure. Central government's pressures to not increase the rate rate charge in itself is a big weakness. And it picks up then on the point made by Councillor Leake, is the fact that when they're saying, I think if I'm right in what Councillor Leake is saying is that it's becoming more questionable as to whether those local authorities have this safety net of being able to, if they're in problems, to up the rate. So I think also I would join in if there is a question. And we'll pick it up as you say, but would like to make that comment at this meeting.
Thank you. I think we're going to have some interesting discussion next week then when we've got the advisors here, particularly about lending to other local authorities. I've got Councillor Gardner and Councillor Mitchell.
Just picking up on the comments on local authority bonds. The bonds we have currently are due to mature in 2015-2016. Could we have a report from the officers on the ability of those councils to repay those bonds on the due dates? I'm saying, we produce our own accounts which show what cash funds we have available to us. I'm merely asking, if we have a look at their accounts now, does it appear that they will have sufficient liquidity at that time to repay the bonds?
I mean, we could go and look at their accounts, but it won't tell you whether they have or they haven't. And basically, when the time comes to repay, if they need to, they will just go and borrow the money to repay us, and that's how they work. We could go and have a look at perhaps their medium-term financial strategy to see if they've allowed anything in there for effectively paying us and then doing borrowing or whatever else they're going to do to bridge the gap. Yeah, so we can do that, but we do operate on the basis that local authorities repay and always have done and always will do. That's on the basis that we're working on.
I think your suggestion is useful, and it will give us some comfort in terms of the current position on the local authority bonds. Just picking up that question on training, we've asked to know which Cabinet members attended their training. I think Cabinet should be informed which members of this committee attend the training that's provided for us.
Okay, but as we're going to be with them next week and we'll see who turns up or not, then I think it's just as easy to look as who's in the room. I don't want to create additional work for the sake of it, but, you know... Well, exactly. I would also say that part of the question around, you know, asking officers to look at the ability to repay, again, it's an element of risk management. I think that's something we should take up with the advisors next week. They'll be presenting to us what they think the future strategy should be. That's exactly why we're meeting. I think it's appropriate that we test their views and thoughts on the level of risk and the market trends of repayment or otherwise by local councils. If that doesn't satisfy us, then by all means we should think again. But I think it would be helpful to take that external view at the moment rather than creating an additional stream of work for something that perhaps is less of an issue or something that's less within our control. Because if we look at a set of information that actually says they're not currently planning to repay us, I think our ability to do a great deal about it is compromised, I would say. So let's see what our advisors guide us in terms of risk management approaches and options next week, and I think it might be helpful to take their view in the first instance, and then we can go from there. Councillor Harvey, you had some... No, fine. The other thing I would say while I'm talking about next week's workshop is that part of the reason for arranging that, as you're familiar with at this time of year, is to enable us to take soundings from our external advisors in terms of the way the market's moving, levels of risk and areas that we might wish to pass comment on to Cabinet as they take a view on our future Treasury management strategy. As I said, Cabinet will be joining us, and therefore we'll have a chance to at least all hear the same thing the same day. We don't actually have anything scheduled to take that back to Cabinet until the new year. However, we do have the meeting in December, which currently has quite a light agenda. And wish to take a view as to whether or not we hold the meeting in December, and potentially discuss amongst us what we hear next week, basically because we'll have had time to consider the Treasury Management Strategy, ask any questions, etc. The only other items on the agenda at the moment are the item referred from full council, so the officer indemnity. Potentially we could also put on there some discussion around our terms of reference, which I mentioned at the start of this meeting. Aside from that, it's a fairly light agenda, so initially my thoughts were to hold it over till January, but if there is a view that we use that session to discuss the Treasury Management Strategy, then I'm open to that. Councillor Mitchell and Councillor Gardner.
I'm no expert in these matters, but it seems to me that we're having on this report that with our incomes down because we're still waiting to sort out our strategy. It seems to me that we should be dealing with the strategy as an urgent item rather than deferring it. As it's in my diary already, I would prefer to talk about it whenever we can, as opposed to deliberately deciding not to talk about it at the earliest possible opportunity.
The short answer to your question is yes.
Councillor Lee?
Yes, and as I've already indicated, I'm afraid I won't be here on the 20th of January because I shall be lying in the sun, hopefully.
Councillor Sherlock?
I would agree with Councillors Mitchell and Gardner.
So shall we make it a festive session to look at the Treasury Management Strategy and pick up the other items as well then? I'm quite happy to do that if that's... Yep, with mince pies, okay, request for mince pies. I'll see if we can, yes, if we can make Treasury Management as festive as possible for the 16th of December. In lieu of any further questions, you have the opportunity for debate, members. Or in lieu of that, you are perfectly happy for me to sum up, and then I will. I think the main point we came out of this is question raised about the cabinet training, and I'm sure we can get the answer to that. But again, I say it is a question where we can see face to face next week who turns up. And our main issue has been around the investment in other councils. And yes, we will certainly note and express our concern about that. But again, it's something we can investigate more closely with advisors next week. And if we have strong views on it, then of course that's a perfect opportunity to speak to cabinet members and guide them about our concerns and our wish perhaps not to continue investing in that way. But we can only make that decision when we've heard the information next week. Okay, I think that moves us on to paper E. If you insist, I'll allow you 2 minutes, but I would ask you to be hasty. Okay, members, we will crack on, I think. So that's paper E. This is our, again, another paper that we asked to be prepared and brought to this committee, and this is on the operation and closure of the 3EN partnership.
Chairman, just before you begin, I did declare an interest in Granger, but I don't think, I hope members agree that it has absolutely, it doesn't affect me one iota that I, okay.
It's, well, you've put it on record, and I think if anything comes up that is specific, we will be aware.
As the cabinet member that originally took this decision through the executive process, do I have to declare that? Is that an issue of declaration at all?
I was just going to say, but there were decision that you made, yes, but decision about, yes.
The decision we made, there's no relation to actually what happened with it in the pursuing 6 years, which was going to be one of my points anyway.
I was just going to say,
But-
I think
that
it's
doesn't
sufficiently
change the fact
yeah.
that, you know, as an executive member, it was the original decision related to 3EN. I don't know what to do, actually.
But
I'm in your hands.
No, I can say I think we are talking here about sort of a factual report on the operation of closure, and I think it's a useful point to make. But again, the decision was taken at full council, so being, you know, yeah. So I think useful to have on record, and you've made the point, and I think we shall just move forward, and otherwise we'll be kind of out of members if we keep going. So okay, so please
Chairman,
introduce.
can I just remind you, it was not a unanimous decision of council. I was the one person who voted against this, and I hope there's living proof.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think that's helpful. Okay, anybody else with any nervousness before we start talking? Eduardo, if you'd like to introduce the paper, please.
Well,
Okay.
hello.
Calm down, calm down.
Well, hello. Thank you very much. So I'll just do a very brief introduction. We prepared a report. As the chair indicated, it was requested by the members of this committee in September that they wanted a full overview of the creation, setup, operation, and closure of the 3N fund. The report includes a section on the background of what the economic climate was at the time, followed on by how the fund was set up using the 106 contribution, which came from 2001-2002. The fund was set up in 2005. Then the report follows with the expected aims of the fund as highlighted in the 2003 Cabinet report. Continues with a section of the history of all the investments made in the fund, followed then by a very brief section on the economic impact the fund had on the borough and the performance of the fund as measured by review that took place in 2010. Then we follow with all of the subsequent monitoring and reporting that took place to different committees on the operation of the fund, followed by the closure of the fund, which was something pursued from 2002, and the decision finally the fund was closed in April, on the last day of April this year, and the report ends with a financial summary of the fund, followed by some conclusions, very briefly laying out, some of the outputs of the 3N fund. And the report also includes 5 appendices, which explains the history of the 8 years of the fund, investment history, financial history, and 2 of the final unaudited accounts for the fund. Once you close, as 3N was closed this year, then the last set of accounts don't have to be audited, so we have the last unaudited accounts up to March 2013, followed by the last month of operation, April 2013, and then we have an appendix on the contribution the fund had in raising the profile of the borough as a place for entrepreneurship and different events that took place. I would also take the opportunity to introduce Bill Eastwood, who is now the corporate finance manager, which we appointed following a tendering process, who is looking after the asset that remains in the hands of the council, which is the shareholding in MWR Infosecurity. And I welcome any questions on the report. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yep, members' questions? Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask the officer if he's able to give me some detail on what the ongoing cost of managing the council's current holding in the one company is going to be.
Following a tendering process, we have appointed Eastwood Anglo Corporate Finance on a monthly fee of £350. So that would be £4,200 a year. We've appointed the company for 3 years with an annual break clause.
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. I'm really going to ask you a bit of crystal ball gazing. MWR Info Security seems to be the major success of our investments. We hold 12% in it. What do you consider to be the long-term future of MWR, and how liquid do you believe that investment is?
As an offer, I would suggest that the finance advisor responds to this question. He'll have a better understanding of the liquidity of the investment. That's okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for inviting me this afternoon. I was appointed in July, and since then have been able to get a reasonable understanding of how MWR is operating. I've sent 2 quarter reports so far to the council on this. You understand broadly what it does. It's testing in the high-tech area, and it's in a very interesting place in the market, of course, at the moment, because this is really the flavour of the month, if you like, in terms of what's going on in this area. It's not. It is profitable. Has been profitable for the last few years. Not massively so, but it's rapidly growing, very rapidly growing. And in terms of this current year, they're expecting to put on probably another 15, 16 employees, not all of whom are in Basingstoke, so yes, it's a good company. It will the majority of it belongs to 2 people who effectively founded it, and they run it. And their sort of medium-term position is, at some point, they would like to realise their investment. It is probably on a 5-year, if you think a 5-year sort of scale from where we are today, is where they'd be looking to exit. I did a valuation which is mentioned in here, and I think I should just, if I may, Chair, point out that that valuation is done under the criteria that are required to be done. So it's done for balance sheet purposes, and it values the company, the whole company, as though the company were to be sold on the date that valuation is dated, in this case March, and as though it had been prepared properly for about a year beforehand for sale. It is not what you would expect to get for a 12% stake today. The 12% stake, answering directly your question to the Chair, is illiquid. It's not saleable. I can't go out and just find a buyer for it. There is the possibility that the existing shareholders might be interested in making an offer for a 12% stake. We're not 100% sure of that as yet, but that's a possibility. And at some point, I think somebody, and I'm not quite sure who it is, and I was speaking to Dean about this earlier, somebody will have to decide whether they want to take sort of short-term position and realise the investment, or whether they ought to stay in long-term. And this is, whilst I can advise on value, it becomes really a matter of strategy for the council. Are they happy holding unlisted investments with all of the inherent risks. Small companies are risky. Small companies go bust easier than large ones, and things happen that can have, as we see every day in the press, can bounce back on the shareholders. So they're the sort of downside. On the other hand, if you're willing to take a long-term view, this is a good, well-managed company in an interesting area, and in my estimate, the shareholding will be worth more in 5 years' time, materially more in 5 years' time than it is today. But given all the risks, then that's a decision that has to be taken by the council, whichever body of the council has to take that decision. Does that help, Chairman?
Yes, thank you. That somewhere in there was the answer I wanted. Thank you.
I think the general scene setting and context was helpful. Councillor Leake.
Sorry, you're getting old. You're valuing it at, I think, 4.5 million. What multiple of EBITDA is that?
It's about... Sorry, I didn't hear that.
What multiple of EBITDA is that?
Multiple of profit. It's about...
So can we swap links?
Earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortization.
We think...
My life.
The valuation wasn't done on the basis of taking a multiple and applying it to the earnings. It was done on an underlying discounted cash flow basis, which is what I'm saying. It's not a marketplace valuation because it doesn't yet have a stable level of earnings to which you can apply a multiple. But you can go backwards and say, what does it mean in terms of what does it end up at? And it's about 12 times in answer to your question.
12 times EBITDA.
Yeah, historical. So the sort of 1913, 2013 number, and that compares to the main business that's in the same sort of area is a company called NCC, which is the old National Computer Company, and that has part of its business is very similar to what MWR does. The other part, it's escrow software, and which is a very profitable thing. So you've got to split the two out. But that company at the moment is on a PE, an after-tax PE, somewhere around 20 pounds. So it's anything that's sort of active in this area does attract high multiples. Yeah.
Thank you. Certainly, go on.
According to this, and I do recall, the consultation on the closure took place in January, and I did comment at that time to the portfolio holder. I noticed that, I can't remember actually when the decision was actually taken, but I note from the accounts that we continued to pay the fund manager right through to the end of April. And I wondered why we had to do that, because that was quite expensive. I would have thought once you made a decision to close, you stopped making payments to a manager.
The decision was made to close the company at the end of March. However, as at that point, we hadn't we hadn't gone through a tendering process to appoint another fund manager, let's say another financial advisor. We felt it could be in the best interest of the council to have someone to look after the asset, the shareholding in MWR, in a period until the fund closed. The fund didn't close until the end of April, so effectively it was we entered into what was called a handover agreement, and at that point it was thought that would be the best use of money in case there was any incident or any type of activity that took place that affected the valuation of the company until we appointed, in this case, Eastwood Anglo Corporate Finance. So it was done trying to hold the council's interest in the shareholding at the less risky scenario in case anything would happen. We didn't think that we should leave the shareholding just floating, let's say, or just, you know, unmanaged for a period of time without somebody to have a look into this.
But Mr. Eastwood's just said he wasn't actually appointed. I think you said August. July. So are you now telling me that we continue to pay the fund manager after the 30th of April? And if we did, why did we? I mean, you know, who and where? Because where did that money come from?
The money came from a £50,000 fund that was set up with a view to close the fund. However, we entered into an agreement by which the handover period, we would only pay the fund manager for 1 month after the closure of the fund, and until the appointment of Bill took place. And from that point onwards, the fund manager, or Invatec in this case, would only act if we asked him. So it was a reactive contract, and at which point no action was requested from Invatec following the end of May, if I recall properly. So nothing was paid from the end of May. So it was a handover agreement for 1 month. From that point, there would be a daily rate under which the fund manager, Invatec, would be paid only if we as a council instructed them. And we did not instruct them because there was no activity, nothing took place that merited calling the fund manager, Invatec in this case, to take any activity. So it was just a measure of security for us in case anything were to happen.
Would you agree with me that paying £7,000 a month just to monitor one investment is an awful lot of money? And was it really necessary?
It is, I have to say, it does seem, it was unfortunately a situation where we, just to avoid any risk in the management of the shareholding, we entered into an agreement with Invatec just out of continuity because they knew the sector, they knew the investment, and
It does sound in the
it did cost
context,
money.
yeah, clearly a decision was taken, the money was spent, it does sound in context. Yeah, well, like I say, excessive, but nonetheless done potentially to avoid further risk to the council. So I can understand the rationale behind it, but I think given that it's passed, we can only make comment on it rather than ask for explanation. I've got Councillor Mitchell and then Councillor Parker. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chairman. This is going back to the remaining asset. Two questions. Are we the only external shareholder?
No, there are two ex-employees who are shareholders, and they hold about 7% between them. The company has a South African subsidiary. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. It has a subsidiary, 75% owned subsidiary in South Africa. So again, successful business, profitable. And the minority shareholder in that business also holds a small shareholding of 2-3%. Otherwise, the shareholders are the two founders and their families, and one of the non-exec directors also has a small shareholding in there. So it was certainly the only institutional shareholder.
It always makes you stop. It's quite a long time since I was directly engaged in startups and early growth, but at some stage, the entrepreneurs moving forward start recruiting sort of. I try to avoid being rude because this is not my company. If I talk to my people I was working with, I'd say directly, and I'll say it directly, real management, because entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs, and some of them are successful serial entrepreneurs, but in the end they are managers. And if you're going to market, part of what the market looks at is who you've got on board. Have they started to do that, or are they moving in that direction?
I would say Ian Shaw, who's the chief executive, I would actually say he's a good manager. He is a good manager. I forget his detailed background, but he'd done other things before he came into this. And Alex Fidian, who's the other owner, shareholder, director, he's the sales director and is also very competent. The company has been deficient in financial management for exactly the reasons that you say. The company grew. It had a company secretary, accountant who was good enough in the early days. Isn't anymore.
Was ever that?
Yes, exactly. And he, as always, it's a bit of a difficult parting, but he has just recently left, and the new proper finance director has been appointed. And if I had one criticism, it's that the financial information for the board hasn't been what's needed for a company of the current size, but the rest of it, the corporate governance, is very good. They have a professional, very good chairman, and they do follow proper corporate governance guidelines, which I'd say well up to the standard for a company of this size. And they've just recruited a new member of the board who comes from government. It's the only time I've ever had this experience, but his CV is, I can tell you where I work, but I can't tell you what I've been doing for the last 15 years, which is a very interesting thing. But he is very, very good, and in terms of the areas, they do quite a bit of government work. The areas that they're going into, it'll be good. So yeah, they're doing the right things, and I do think that Ian Shaw is competent, certainly for the next stage. If it was a FTSE 100, then no, it wouldn't be, but it isn't, and there are a number of stages that it needs to go through before it gets to this.
I had Councillor Parker next before. Councillor Parker?
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry that I'm just going back on one thing, but it's linked to this potential for us having this holding, and then I hear what's being said about the sector and the excitement of the market development, but on a sort of medium to long term, retaining a holding that potentially the costs of management erode any potential value. And I'm picking up that I think this is not the likelihood, but I don't understand, and the point that was being raised about the expensive monthly fee being paid to a fund manager, I don't really understand what the fund manager was doing in that period of time, and I don't therefore understand what a current fund manager is doing in terms of managing the fund, because the point that was made in terms of the financial situation is that the shares can't be sold anyway. The only prospect of them being sold is when the founding directors choose to realise their investment. So there's not a decision for a fund manager to make. It would appear to me.
I'm not a fund manager. I'm a corporate finance advisor. I was the council, or the council as shareholder, is party to an investment agreement, and it has powers, quite extensive powers, to make sure that the business is run properly. And those powers involve a number of decisions. So, for instance, appointment of a director, new loans, new capital investment, virtually any material decision that the company makes has to be approved by the shareholder. Now, if the investment was in a fund, then the fund manager would be doing that. I was given the brief, and a twofold brief. One is to try and find an exit for the council for its shares. So it isn't true to say the shares can't be sold. I think they can be sold. It comes down to value, and so the stages are: here's what I think you'd be able to sell this shareholding for, and then it comes back to whichever body in the council makes the decision to say, do we want to hold this unlisted investment or don't we? And so it can be sold, I'm all, and as well as the power, one of the other powers under the agreement that the council as investor has is the power to appoint a non-executive director to the board, and so the council have now appointed me as a non-executive director on the board. So I sit in at board meetings representing the council's interest. In terms of the cost to the council are paying me £360 a month. I would dare to suggest that's not a lot of money for what, having spent a day at a meeting here to begin with. But much as I enjoy the meeting, but I really don't think, well, it's perhaps not my place to say so, but I really don't think that as at now, I mean, the previous position I wasn't involved in, can't comment on, other than those powers that exist under the investment agreement had to be exercised by somebody, and that somebody needs to be a qualified person of some sort, either a fund manager or, as in our case, an authorised corporate finance firm. And whilst there was a gap, some of those decisions actually just didn't get taken, and which was fine. The company, they were okay with it. But for instance, increasing the chief executive's salary is something on which the council has a veto, and which I exercise on their behalf in the normal manner that you would do as a non-executive. They didn't get their increase for 3 months because there was no one to take the decision. There were no big problem, but all I'm saying is that those decisions have to start to be taken at some point, and there's an option scheme, for instance. Things have to be done with that, so those decisions need taking. There was a period when the previous fund manager took them, there's a bit of a gap, and I'm now taking. Someone has to take those decisions, and with respect, I don't think it can be the officers of council, because they're not trained to do that particular job.
Thank you. That was a helpful explanation of your role. Councillor Park, you want to come back before Councillor Leake?
Yes, I would like to say also I'm very grateful of that explanation, and to save any embarrassment, I was not aware that it was an either or. This seemed to be, from what I was reading in the report, was that we had both. We currently had now a new fund manager, and we currently had the person present giving us the advice. John, if I can finish, of which I'm quite happy to say, I also agree, is a very competitive price.
But I do get a salary but I am paid by the company as a non-executive director, 6,000 a year, which is, it's actually quite low for a non-exec position, but just in case I don't need to declare an interest. But sorry, yes, and I do get a commission if the shares are sold of 4.5%. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. That's helpful. Councillor Leake, you had a
yes. I would like to say, I mean, I don't have any problem with paying 360 quid a month. I think that's good value. It was the 7,000 quid a month that I was championing. But I just wanted to ask, as I understand it from here, I think it says there are 78 employees, but I wasn't aware when I read that there was a South African subsidiary. I would like to know how many people are actually employed in Basingstoke.
Chairman, I anticipating this very question. I got some information at the end of June, which is their year end. There were 60 staff and 9 interns. They use interns quite actively, and they happen to be there employed at the year end, so they come into the employee figures. But then on top of that, there were 13 in South Africa, and of the 60 plus 9. 10 were in London, in the London office. So employed in Basingstoke, there were 50 plus 9 in Basingstoke. And what they're saying is they would expect, they're currently 90 employees, 60 to 65 being in Basingstoke, and 7, 9 Manchester, there's a Manchester office as well, and 11 in London. And they're going to go up again to a total of 83 permanent employees. 60 to 65 at the moment, plus another 9 interns next time. So that's the approximate number in Basingstoke.
Perhaps, Chairman, when they open their Silicon Valley office, we could all go out to inspect it.
Okay, members, I don't seem to have any further questions. Do you wish to make any comment or have any debate? Councillor Parker.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think it was, apart from maybe the little bits of detail that's now been added at the end, I was thinking it was a balanced and informative report. I think for my part, I think it's a bit of a regret that in the format of the report, that conclusion paragraphs 11.3, 11.4, 11.5 and 11.6 perhaps couldn't have appeared at the beginning of the report, because it's not all bad news, and that's been potentially the sort of reflected views, it would appear, that maybe it was. And I think in general terms, when you look at 100 jobs created, we've heard now within the Basingstoke, maybe 59 going to 69 continuing, but in fact overall 3 yen I'm talking about here, not just the one company. 3 yen, there's 78 jobs continuing, job creations, gross value added for the borough of equivalent of 4.5 million per annum. During the 7-year period, the investment was supporting local community payment on commercial rents, business rates and tax. And we have, as a local authority, I think, gained a considerable element of prestige in the seminars and the discussions and the comment from other organisations in relation to being entrepreneurial. And the one company that we've just been discussing is, the report's words, a world-leading cybersecurity company. So, for my part, in the vein of a very popular show, I would just like to say that I consider, my dears, it's not been a complete disaster.
Thank you for that helpful reflection. I've got Councillor Gardner, then Councillor Leake, and we are 6 minutes off moving standing orders, just as a helpful note.
I would like to endorse Councillor Parker's comments, because I think this has been a success story. It was £1 million that the council had available to it at a time when the market was much better than it is now, and we ploughed it into an area which probably needed some encouragement at that time. Quite a few of the investments didn't work out, but failure is no crime. Not trying is the crime. So I think we were doing the right thing at the right time, and I think we have probably come out in a better position than perhaps we could have expected when we made the first investment.
Thank you. Councillor Leake.
Obviously, I take a totally contrary view. It's a demonstration that local authorities should not get involved in equity investment. They know nothing about it. You should leave those things to the professionals, and I hope that lesson has been learnt. I was totally opposed to this at the beginning, and when we look at the loss that we've incurred, and hopefully this investment may be very good, and I'm all in favour of equity investment. That's my life. You know, we may come out of it smelling of everything, salt, and it may be wonderful. But at the moment, we have a large loss, and what we have forgotten is the opportunity loss in addition to that. We could have put this into bricks and mortar, which might have been worth considerably more, but even if we'd left it in cash, we would have earned interest, probably at 3% on 1.1 million for 8 or 9 years, and that is also a substantial sum of money. So I hope lots of lessons have been learned. It hasn't been a great success in my view, and I don't really want to say I told you so.
Thank you. If members have exhausted themselves on the topic, I think that draws to conclusion our meeting for today. So thank you very much for your involvement. And I'll see you on the 16th with mince pies. Thank you. Oh, you see you next... Of course we will. Having just promoted it, I forgot all about it. Yes, see you next week for the Treasury Management Report. Yes, I'm going to say don't forget to be here. Yes, it'll be embarrassing if we're not now. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.